Hello, I'm Jennifer, and I'm very happy we have Catherine with us today to have a short interview. So the first question I want to ask is, how sustainable you think you are, like point 1 to 10?
Difficult question. Everything other than airline travel, very sustainable. So 9 maybe. I'm very, very careful, and I used to teach sustainability, so in everything. Airline travel is more complicated because I have to do it, so I make sure I don't have a car. And I make sure that I don't use too much water. I make sure I use all the food. I never throw food away. I'm very careful, but then my ex-husband worked in sustainability, and I used to teach sustainability, so I think maybe I have more ideas than some people.
It's really nice.
I think it's really important, and the younger generation are more aware, so I hope this changes the world.
So when I say sustainable, what pops up in your mind?
Okay, so what I should think of is systems that don't destroy themselves. But really what I think of is I think of recycling.
Recycling?
Yeah, in the big sense of not just recycling plastics, but also recycling food and also recycling objects. So upcycling, recycling, etc.
So you know that food waste is a big issue?
Oh yes. Yeah. And I'm really surprised at how much food people throw away. When you know how much the average person throws away, it's really frightening. When we were young, we didn't have very much money. My parents were young when I was young, and my mum was always really, really careful to use everything. So everything was used, and she would make menus to make sure she used everything. And I think that's really important.
Can you think of some ways that can save food waste, or some examples that maybe the company do to save food waste?
So I know that this is a bad example, but it's useful. So my sister's company used to give the food away. So they have a chef, and they used to give it to the homeless people. But then they got sued for food poisoning, so now they don't do it anymore. So my sister takes things out of its packet and gives it away because it can't have the company logo on it. But that's a bad thing. I know that you can do things with bread in particular. You can make bread and butter pudding, for example. You can freeze the bread. You can make crumble from it. You can put it in cookies, and I do that with my nephew. So I know that there are a few things you can do. I don't think I necessarily know all the things you can do, because I think if you don't need it, because you are careful, you don't necessarily innovate. I wouldn't have thought about beer. I would never have thought about that.
So like, I want to introduce
you mentioned this before.
Yeah, but this one called Toast Ale beer.
I can recognize that. I don't know the logo.
I can see.
Because I live in a place, it's very focused on recycling, and there are a lot of independent beer, but I've never seen this one.
I bought it in co-op.
Okay, I used up in the co-op,
Yes. And it's also like use a waste beer to brew it.
It's a really good idea.
Yeah.
There's a lot of waste beer, and instead they try to sell it cheap to students.
Yes. Another like the company that deal with food waste is Too Good To Go.
Yeah.
You know. So do you use it?
No, I've never used it. I've heard of it. I have a health problem, which means that I have to be very careful, so I can't eat things with pesticides. I can't eat things with onion and garlic. So this means that my diet is very simple, but yes, I have heard of Good To Go.
When people mention about food waste, always link with like food security.
Oh, I do, yeah.
So will this like stop you from using like Too Good To Go app?
No, because I would trust them. What it does stop me doing is it stops me from buying things that are too cheap. The only way you can make food this cheap is if you are using lots of pesticides or lots of antibiotics. Or
So do you have any like recommend for like Taiwan students or people like to think of sustainable?
I know that I used to teach sustainability to the bachelors, the final year bachelors in Chambay and in Grenoble, and I always worried about the amount of meat that students ate, and particularly Chinese students. It's very typical of a company that has come out of famine, and they associate eating meat every meal with eating well. And obviously we can't sustain that. McDonald's, we can't sustain. We have to, and McDonald's are good, don't get me wrong. McDonald's are making enormous steps towards being more sustainable, and I think they get a bad reputation, and they don't necessarily deserve it, because they do think about their supply chain, and they think about shop local, they think about a lot of things. But essentially the beef burger is, maybe the education is important, that people realise that we can't eat beef burgers and beef the way we are. Are people going to want to eat crickets? I don't know, you probably know Taiwanese people better than me, but would they eat insects?
Not really, like not common.
No, so this is something we're trying to educate British people about.
Really?
How nutritious insects are, because they're very high in protein and they're cheap. But yes, your face says it all.
A little bit disgusting.
Yes. I think more education is important, young education, and getting people to realise that supply chains are more complicated than they realise. So something my parents did when we were young is that one day a week we didn't eat meat. And the money that we saved, we paid to a charity for education in Africa. And I think things like that are really useful because I remember that, and that had a big impact on me, because you can have conversations with young children about why you do these things and why it's important. And I see my parents having those conversations with my nephew now. And I honestly think the problem is my generation, not your generation.
Really?
Your generation is unaware, often, but open. My generation will say, I can't change how I am. And I think maybe we use the young generation to change their parents. But one of my Chinese students went back to China to teach critical thinking in primary schools, to get people to think differently, not criticise the state, but just to not accept everything and to think about the different sides. And I think if we teach people to think a bit differently, then they think a bit differently about everything.
Yeah, critical thinking.
And also to think about where you can make a difference. My ex-partner, he's terrible. He's not the one I'm with now, but the one I had my children with. And when his wife is away, his wife is very, very strict about recycling, but when she's away, he does nothing. Everything just goes in the bin. And I said, do you separate your glass? And he says, no, it's too much work. I said, I think you're a scientist, you must understand about waste and about how little space we have for all this waste, and how the Brits are having to send their waste to Scandinavia because they don't have any space for it anymore. But yeah, anyway. So I think education is key, and getting people to take action, because people only want to do what's convenient for them. So one thing my sustainability partner used to say, the quickest way to kill the sustainability movement is to make it less good quality. So you have to make sure that sustainable products are as good as non-sustainable products, because if people perceive it as a lower value, then they will not understand the value.
Yes.
So that's my last thought on that, is make sure that the products that you do are really good quality, because you don't want people to associate sustainability with poor quality.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. You're welcome.